EA is on Twitch. Join us Wednesday nights when Alistair, that's me, reads a bedtime story, and Sunday mornings for a few hours of chill gaming. Plus interviews, special guests, pickup streams, and more. Visit twitch.tv/EA podcasts and follow us to be notified when we go live. Plus access VODs of past broadcasts.
Escape Pod. Episode 899. Sounding the Fall. By J.D. Marcade. Flashback Friday.
Hello, and welcome to Escape Pod, your weekly science fiction podcast. I'm Valerie Valdez, your host for this episode. Our story this week is a flashback from the archives, Sounding the Fall, by J.D. Marcade. The story was first published in Escape Pod in July 2015. J, noun, a 20-something first-gen Korean-American speculative fiction writer and freshly minted librarian, currently installed in the Rust Belt with a hydrobot and a hedgehog. Preferred pronoun, gender neutral, a.m. air. Likes, thunderstorms, body mods, martial arts, comic books, bioluminescence, cute stationery, crepuscular skyscapes, the sea, werewolves, the Seoul metro system, coffee, black, whiskey, meat, and cheese aplenty. Dislikes, people who talk at the cinema, humidity, werewolves, and vindictive dead things with too much hair and a penchant for flouting the laws of physics. Research interests include ambient intelligent environments, augmented reality, cyborg anthropology, linguistics, memetics, the occult, and spooky stories. Our narrator, Amanda Cheng, is a freelance editor and writer. Her work has appeared in Word Riot, Candlemark, and Gleam's Alice Revisions, and every bathroom stall on I-80 from Pittsburgh to Indianapolis. Now, get ready to greet the divine within a monk who knows what it means to fall, because it's story time.
Sounding the Fall by J.D. Marcade. Sometimes, Nare can almost convince himself that the AI's voice was a dream. Some kind of minor stroke misremembered, a neurological glitch retroactively given recognizable shape. But sometimes, less frequently of late, but still sometimes, Nare wakes to find himself sitting up in the dark, jaw slack, a sustained atonal note spooling from the back of her throat. Nare steps through the open archway of the southwestern gate, bare toes curling in the cool blades of real grass with which the temple grounds are seeded. The lotus-shaped lanterns hanging from the eaves go dim as the sun activates, and from its single-tiered pagoda at the top of the hill behind him, the morning bell tolls. The alms left anonymously against the outer wall in the night include a couple bolts of inert gray fabric, some bags of rice, and a stack of real tea bricks. Upon hefting the rice, Nere's eyebrows inch toward the shadow of her hairline at each bag's weight, not synthetic either, these. Something that is part bemusement, part nostalgia tugs at the corners of Nere's mouth, and A shakes her head as A piles the bags and bolts into the bottom of the wheelbarrow before turning to gather the rest. There, on the topmost tea brick, tucked along the raised edge of an elaborate curlicue that must have gone overlooked when the temple's faceless benefactor hastily scraped off the embossed logo, is a perfectly rolled joint. Nere plucks the thing up by one tip and crosses the outer lawn, ready to cast it over the rail that wraps around the temple grounds and down along the winding stone staircase to the lower levels. Steady as a heartbeat, the temple's morning drum begins to sound out. When its reverberations subside, they leave an even deeper reservoir of silence behind them. Nere falters at the edge of the lawn. A brings the roll of rice paper to her nose, gives it a tentative sniff, and releases an explosive sigh. Nere would bet a week's worth of chores that it's real, none of that backstreet synth hash with its foul aftertaste. Muttering a guilty prayer, A palms the joint. Then A crosses her arms over the railing and leans out past the perimeter of the noise barrier, and the rest of the world roars into being. Down the vast, hollow core of the new Hanyang Danchi Ma Tower, every pocket of air bursts with announcements and pop music, with the erratic trills and pings of external devices, all beneath the interminable cacophony of countless human voices raised in conversation and laughter and anger and song. The vertical spaces teem with brilliantly backlit signs, public access smart screens, and floating banners as far as Nere can see. Augmented reality layers advertising sales, municipal campaigns, and upcoming expositions are stacked so deep in the public channels that the displays look seamless, rendering the visual world devoid of negative space. A doggedly enforced distance below Nere's feet, the airspace at the temple level is a no-fly zone. Cat-sized drones glitter and bob like damselflies, dodging luminescent shield kites and the occasional cloud of languid moon jellyfish. Sensory overload crashes down on Nere like a tidal wave, the only approximation of sea that A has ever known, and more swiftly and thoroughly than 108 prostrations ever could. It washes out the inside of Nere's skull as though it's no more than a dirty rice bowl. And in its wake is a sticky kernel of fierce longing that leaves them gasping, makes them reel back from the railing to catch their breath. Movement at the edge of the lawn. Nere drops her hand automatically to hold the joint out of sight behind her leg. Someone is watching him from the shade of the persimmon trees, her features lost in the pale pre-dawn setting of the false sun in the ceiling high above them. The stranger is dressed in standard civilian wear, a matching set of ivory trousers, shirt, and sleeveless coat in a generous cut, the slick indigo honeycomb pattern marking the fabric as a government-issued textile. That A has left her clothes inactive makes Nere wary, wondering if it's better to avoid detection in the dark. Nere turns her head, mechanical eye whirring as it works to bring the stranger's face into focus, while Nere skims the public profile layer that appears superimposed in the air beside it. The stranger's call sign is listed as Tomapem. Hardly more than a child at 26 years, Nere's junior by over a decade, her profile is typical for her age cohort, bearing a dizzying array of bright colors and animated emoticons. A cheeky introductory blurb, written in boldly informal language, is a snarl of references and slang that Nere doesn't even try to untangle. "Need a light?" Tomabem calls, when it becomes clear that Nere has noticed them. Slipping the joint into the wide sleeve of her overcoat, Nere presses her palms together in hapchang, thumbs brushing her chest, and bows in Tomabem's direction. "The divine in me greets the divine in you," A murmurs. Tomabem smirks at the clumsy evasion and dips into a shallow bow that is a touch too brief to be considered courteous. Nere flexes her free hand into the mudra that informs her fingertip implants to expand and scroll. Tomabem's profile lists a few interests, favorite idols, romantic preferences, and priority social circles, but no contracts, no job, no subject of study. A has designated her pronoun preference as the feminine singular, so Nere reorients her thinking accordingly. The echoes of the gong on the hilltop fade into stillness. Nere will be late to prostrations. Tomapem twitches her own fingers and frowns. As a rule, monks' public profiles are sparse, consisting only of their citizen identification codes, chosen names, and monastic affiliations. Monastery-issued implants are not enabled to sync with outsiders, and most of Nere's personal implants are so outdated that Tomabem's would likely not recognize them, even had they not been deactivated a long time ago. An almost inaudible click signals the beginning of recorded birdsong, and Tomabem twitches with surprise. The trunk behind her is installed with a speaker. "But some of these are real," she says, touching the scaly bark of the tree to her right. Her speech is as rough as her profile, brazenly familiar despite the difference of their age, and colored with an unfamiliar patois. "What guides you to our temple, traveler?" Nere squeezes the words through her teeth, though A makes a point of addressing her with the precise level of formality that befits an initial encounter with a stranger. Above them, the sun brightens into its early morning setting. "I've heard that Ma Tower has no AIs," she says casually, as though she is remarking on the efficiency of the climate control. "Not up here," A says, matching her tone, but the Tanchi AI is functioning on the lower levels. There are only a few reasons why anyone would seek out a place that lacks the convenience and security and constant surveillance of an artificial intelligence. Nere forms the mudra to call up search layer. A drags Tomabem's profile into the query box of a newsfeed. Air search yields a handful of matches. A skip trace alert issued from the Da Tower for unspecified clan name Go Han Xiao, bearing a capture of Tomabem's face, a short series of articles covering her recent trial. The monastery's layer access restrictions redact the nature of Go's crime, but the sentence, 5 years as an AI auxiliary, is harsh. You're thinking of joining the monastery, Nere guesses. Monkhood is not a popular alternative, but not an uncommon one either. Relearning how to use her own tech upon restoration might not keep Tomabem out of the world for too long, but after 5 years of inactivity, her augmentations would be hopelessly outdated. My friends say I might as well do my time as an ox. She glances up at Nere, away. Nere is suddenly conscious of the AI ports lining the back of her neck, the base of her skull, stark against her bare scalp. From out of nowhere, Tomabem produces a light. Fire starters are contraband. Nere hasn't seen one in civilian hands for years. Yet, A brings the joint to her lips in an automatic motion and leans in to touch it to the flame. Tomabem's gaze finds Air's. But it isn't the same, is it? Air breathing has quickened. Nere releases a trembling plume of smoke. From the back of her mind, a faint mechanical wail rises in the dark. No, A says. It's not. What do you remember? That was always the question everyone asked at first. The response that Nere gave most regularly was, nothing. And it was almost true. Between unlit activation and cognitive restoration, an ox is wholly unaware of her own bodily processes, of the myriad repair and maintenance tasks that the AI performs unerringly throughout the Tanchi with the ox's hands. But some part of Nere remembers cold and darkness and the sensation of plunging through it, unable to draw breath as sterile air whipped past him, disoriented and seized with the anticipatory terror of impact. 15 years of falling. That's the part that defies easy explanation. Everyone thinks that an ox just goes to sleep when the AI plugs in, that in a blink it's all over, and the ox regains consciousness to learn that their sentence has passed with M none the wiser. No one tells you before about the falling. No one tells you about the voice. With no sensory input, it was impossible to keep track of time, so Nere cannot guess when A first became aware of sound, never mind when A began to discern a pattern to it. After a while, what started out as ambient noise, easy to ignore, rose to the forefront of Nere's awareness and pressed in, distant mutter clicks and long, low drones, murmurs in the hiss of static, an erratic pulse of electronic bursts that synced perfectly at times to the relentless bass of what Nere suspected was her own heartbeat. In the darkness, waving threads of 10, 20, 100 unremitting tones plaited together, forming a dissonant electric hum, a terrible voice that ratcheted up to a distorted scream song in which Nere could swear A heard her name. How long has Tomabem been lurking at the edges of the lawn outside the gate, hoping against the odds to find someone like Nere? Or has she lucked out with this chance meeting with a former ox? But of course, there is no such thing as happenstance, only a fractal in a grand design too vast to see. Beneath her hood, Tomabem's face is practically as unmodified as Nere's, almost unrecognizable from her own public profile, though Nere can see the outlines of implants in the ridge of her brow and on either side of her neck. A bald earnestness slips through, making her look heartbreakingly young. Is it awful? Nere hesitates, thinks of the cold, the fall, the voice. But Tomabem clarifies. Monastic life, I mean, it must be awful. Why else would it be an equal sentence to serving as an ox? We have our own garden, a small one, A amends, when Tomabem's eyes grow wide with wonder. The temple's living quarters have a basic food synthesizer and printer like any home. It's a simple life, but not a barbaric one, and it's still a form of service. Nere passes Tomabem the joint. Rocking back on her heels, A gestures at lotus lamps, at the dirt path winding up the hill behind the gate. Some consider this the difference between rehabilitation and punishment. After all, as the saying goes, crimes are committed by people who have lost touch with God. The monastery creates the space and the focus to facilitate your return. Twin streams of smoke unfurl from Tomabem's nostrils. Some people say that it's God who's lost touch with us, that A can't hear us in all this noise. She tilts her head toward the railing, to the world beyond. No, God waits here, Nere says, touching Air own temple, in everyone. To find God, one must search within. There is such conviction in Air voice that Nere surprises Airsev. And you? Have you found him? Nere feels Air eyebrows furrow as A pushes smoke through the corner of Air mouth. Some people have to search deeper. Domabem's answering laugh ends in a cough. That reminds me of that story about the ship that carries the only survivors of a flooded world, looking and looking for dry land. Most people say that it's an allegory about soul, that the ship represents an arcology like the Tanji, and the story tells us to hold fast until the toxicity levels outside the towers drop. Nere has heard this one too. Or the ship represents a ship, and we need to build one and leave. Or maybe the ship is a person. Domabem turns her head, eyes flickering as she scans some communication scrolling across a private AR layer. I have to go, she says, handing the joint back to Nere. I'm staying with some people, 8 levels down. Can you meet me there around this time tomorrow, near the fountain, shaped like a bunch of seahorses? At the top of the stairs, she stops, turns back. Have you heard what people are saying about the AI? Nere waits. Some people think it's God. It is mid-afternoon before Nere catches sight of the chief monk on Air own. A strolls amongst the spiraling hydroponics towers, inspecting the health of the greenery that sprouts from gleaming white tubes. Nere sets aside the string of lamps that A has been rewiring. Anywhere else, this sort of work would be left with a maintenance request for an ox to repair. That this temple insists on self-sufficiency is part of what has kept M here for going on 6 years. A traipses across the lawn, through an obstacle course of child monks at play, their robes flapping like the wings of ungainly baby birds as they swarm around a soccer ball. Cheyung Sunim, Nere calls. May I... Move aside, little baldies. Have a word? At 216, An Cheyung is the oldest person that Nere has ever met, burnished copper skin so thin that it almost looks transparent in spots, eyebrows so sparse as to be ghostly suggestions tracing the hollows of eyes. The faded ink of skeletal serpent, or is it a dragon, tattoo, is almost invisible against neck as it disappears down the collar of robes to re-emerge from sleeve, the creature's tail coiling around a mottled arm as slender as reed. Chayang turns away from a tower A was examining to greet Nere in Hapchang. The divine in me greets the divine in you. A returns the greeting distractedly, scratching the back of calf with the top of foot. The twin crescents of Cheyong's eyes are almost lost amidst a mass of fine lines as A smiles. Nere Sunim, we missed you at prostrations this morning. Nere waves away the mild rebuke as though it is a particularly cloying fog of incense smoke. I have a problem, Nere says without preamble. Of course, Cheyong says placidly. There's this... Wait, what do you mean, of course? What do you think my problem is? Never mind. Do continue. Nere presses lips together and reconsiders the wisdom of knee-jerk response, opting instead to forge on and describe encounter with Domapem. And she wants to talk to me again tomorrow about being a monk. What is it about this that troubles you? Nere frowns and steps in front of the elder monk, bending knees to lower himself to Chayong's height. Chayong Sunim, do you recognize my face? It's me, Nere. Yeah, I haven't gone senile yet, you little... Chayong visibly recenters himself. Nere takes private satisfaction in knowing that A has always been exceptionally talented at bringing out claws. Your experiences make you an ideal advisor to this young person, yes? I just don't think that someone like me is exactly the best representative of the temple, do you? I'm considering sending Kyung Sunim, or maybe even Namil Sunim in my stead, if you can excuse either from their chores. You will do admirably. A says with gentle finality. Now, why don't you tell me what else is weighing on your mind? Nere hesitates. Something she said about the AI. Someone has given her the impression that the AI itself might be... Nere shakes her head, but the laugh that A forces is edged with a note that is worryingly close to hysteria. Cha-Young's face is impassive as A finishes Nere's sentence. Divine. Nere flinches. It's idiotic, of course, but for some time now, there has been a small but growing sect of people who share this belief. When the administration tried to instate a Danchi-wide compulsory auxiliary service, they offered some of the most strident support for this measure. Cha-Young tilts her head and nods, as though at a private memory made for an instant as solid as the present. I conversed with some of their spokespeople during the protests against compulsory aux service in Ka Tower. In truth, their faith is not so different from any other. Nere boggles at the elder monk. You were at the protests? This time, it is Cheong-Yung's turn to do a sharp double take. It's on public record that this temple helped organize those protests. This surprises you? Well, those rallies had a reputation for getting out of hand, and you're so... you know. Nere gestures vaguely to encompass Che-Young's wizened legs, her curved spine as A grasps for the right word. Feeble? Feeble. Venerable, Nere shouts. I meant venerable. Do you think I entered this world already, a 2 centuries-old husk? Is that what you imagine? Really, I endeavor not to imagine that chapter of history. Nere! A interrupts with a sort of wary patience. What is it that you think we do up here during times of civil unrest? Meditate relentlessly? Nere cannot help but notice that Cha-Young's gaze is shifting incrementally upward, as though A is beseeching the ceiling for serenity. For serenity? We lend our voices to those who are permitted none. Oh. Nere considers this, narrows her eyes. Did we forget about preaching detachment? Cha-Young's narrows her eyes right back. Must we forget about demonstrating compassion? So how do I compassionately convince Tomapem that AI worshippers are lunatics, swindled by admin-funded propaganda? Remember that all rivers return to the sea. Cha-Young plucks a perilla leaf from its mother plant and offers it to Nere. And chew this. Against the backdrop of the false sun, the leaf glows from stem to serrated tip, veins bold against the vibrancy of the blade. Nere holds it aloft with fresh reverence, inhaling its scent. Perilla will grant me insight? The elder monk's smile reveals a little too much teeth. It will mask your smoker's breath. Nere lets her arm drop. Has anyone ever mentioned that having a conversation with you can be like walking through a minefield? Cha-Young claps him on the shoulder and strolls away, chuckling. Go ahead, laugh it up, monkey, Nere mutters at her receding back and crams the leaf into her mouth. If anything, Cha-Young's shoulders shake harder. Tomapem's rendezvous site is in a rare open space in the labyrinthine commercial district, the fountain at the center of a hub where 8 claustrophobic corridors meet. The air is crowded with the scents of burning sugar and cinnamon, of smoked squid, the tang of synthetic coffee. Digital storefronts offer the latest in alternative DIY fashion for modest download fees, providing full-length mirrors equipped with body scanners and modeling layers to demo outfits for shoppers. An elderly street vendor operates a mobile printer encased in a high-tie chassis. The mechanical monster's tail lifts and some freshly molded toy drops into a grinning child's waiting hands. A small crowd gathers around a pair of trad percussionists armed with an hourglass-shaped drum and a set of beaten brass hand cymbals, while an electric gayagum player sways behind their instrument, fingers dancing along the glowing strings. Nere catches the strain of a folk song, all along the watchtower, floating from the speaker panels that run the length of the gayagum player's prosthetic leg. Out of habit, Nere has left her alms bowl uncovered, and as A searches the crowd, someone reaches out to dip their fingers into the bowl. A small chime sounds to indicate the successful transfer of credits, and Nere and the stranger exchange bows. It takes a third scan for Nere to recognize Domabem outside a tteokbokki stand a short distance from the fountain. She has activated her clothes to display a modification of a style that Nere has seen in at least 2 display screens, and her hair falls to her waist in a tangle of fried white locks and neon tubing. Swirling patterns of subcutaneous lights glow through her skin like a biolumes, tracing her cheekbones and freckling her arms. Nere draws alongside her as she taps her fingertips against the tteokbokki vendor's smart screen to pay for the snack. Domabem blows short, sharp blasts of air over her steaming cup. "Let's sit down," she says between breaths. "I'm getting dizzy." "You could just wait for it to cool," Nere says. "I could," Domabem agrees, prodding at the soft cylindrical rice cakes drowning in soy and chili sauce, "except I'm hungry now." Before Nere can evade it, she dumps half the contents of her cup into her alms bowl, along with one of her chopsticks. She spears a rice cake with the other. Nere wipes a trickle of watery red sauce from the side of her bowl. "It's a little early for tteokbokki, isn't it?" "We don't parcel out time like you do up there. Day, night, what's the point?" "The cycle keeps us balanced." "Balance is a myth. What's the matter?" she says around a mouthful. "Too good for synthetic rice?" Nere snorts. "Think we starve when we don't get alms from the dokkebi market? The temple synthesizes as much food as it grows." That the temple doesn't grow chilies, Nere neglects to mention. The slow burn of the red pepper paste prickles Nere's sinuses. Tears blur her vision. Nere turns her head and makes a show of studying the fountain. Domabem has a mercy on him and pulls a bottle of soju from her bag. She unscrews the cap and passes the soju to Nere with aggressive nonchalance, but her face brightens with astonished laughter when Nere accepts the bottle and takes a swig. "Smoking? Drinking? You're not very good at being a monk, are you?" She shakes her head and downs a bowl of soju without wiping the mouth of the bottle. "I once saw a capture of a seahorse." Nere nods toward the blocky structure in the middle of the fountain. Tiny creatures, no bigger than my hand. Beautiful, though, in an alien kind of way. The statue looks exactly as if the sculpture based her design off a sketch I made from my memory of it. "You like drawing, then?" "Yeah," A says, so informally that Domabem looks taken aback. "But I'm a worse artist than I am a monk." Domabem laughs again, full-throated. Nere picks at the soju label before setting the bottle carefully down on the table between them. "The biggest lie the administration will tell you about letting them plug you into the AI is that being an ox is about atonement. It's not. It's about utility." "What if that's not all of it, though?" Nere's shoulders tense. Here we go. "Look, the Tanji AI is just that. Artificial. It's nothing more than a hyper-complex computer program. We created it, not the other way around." "I know that," Domabem says with slow incredulity. "I'm not suggesting that we start worshipping a computer. What I'm saying is, haven't you ever wondered if maybe we're not the only ones who are looking for God?" It takes a moment for Nere to catch on, and when A stares at her, thinks she must be joking, but she does not smile. "The AI?" She shrugs and glances away from whatever expression has shadowed Nere's face, her eyebrows furrowed. "I don't know," she mutters. "Maybe that's why it wants human oxes instead of building its own." Nere presses the heels of her hands to her eyes. "It requires humans because it did a materials analysis and projected that the Tanji lacks resources to build adequately sophisticated chassis. An artificial intelligence can't want anything. Or," Domabem points the mouth of the bottle at M, "maybe we're all ships and the AI is just trying to survive the flood, same as anyone." There's a pretty thought, except the whole time you're an ox, the AI tries to rewrite everything about who you are and leave its own code or programming or whatever in your place. That's why they call it restoration when they wake you up. A playful tone creeps into Domabem's voice as she leans forward, peering into Nere's eyes. "And has it?" "Has it what?" "Left part of itself behind?" Nere recoils. "No." "Nothing to worry about, then." She gets to her feet, stretching with a groan. "Look, thanks for meeting me. You've given me a lot to think about." She traces a sloppy approximation of Hepjang, but her grin doesn't cut as deep as it did before. "See you around, Nere Sunim." And Nere can tell, watching her saunter away, only a little unsteady on her feet, that she won't be rushing to don a monk's greys any time soon. A could still call her back, work harder to win her over to monastery life. Nere hesitates for a moment, and the moment stretches. A's never been good at selling something that A still hasn't bought. "The kid'll be fine." Nere insists to the silent reprobation of your conscience as A walks the 8 flights up to the temple. 5 years is nothing, all rivers and all that. But at night, A dreams of falling, of the wind calling your name. Nere is on an alms round when A glimpses Domapem, head-shaved, face slack, dressed in a uniform boiler suit. Nere stiffens, her pulse accelerating, though the ox gives no indication of noticing Nere in the throng as it repairs a faulty noise barrier node. Her first instinct is to cover her bowl and move on, but A is stymied by the press of bodies edging along the thoroughfare. Then the ox finishes its work and looks directly across at Nere. The hairs on her arms stand at attention, and Nere has to stifle the urge to hurl her bowl at its face and bolt. The AI's equipment sensors must recognize Nere by her own ox ports, A reasons. That's all. Expressionless as a corpse, it opens its mouth to greet Nere by her citizen ID, and A flinches, though it speaks only with Domapem's voice and not the mechanical caterwauling that haunts her nights. A few passers-by slow to give the ox curious looks, unused to the spectacle of an AI unit interacting with the public. After all, as everyone knows, an ox cannot deviate from its directives, cannot choose to engage in casual conversation with citizens. There is no AI in Ma Tower, Nere reminds himself. No way for the Danchi to have observed our conversations with Domapem 3 years ago, to know that this particular body has any significance to Nere. It is merely a coincidence that the AI has selected to address him through an ox that Nere knows. No. There is no such thing as happenstance. As Nere weighs the second truth against the first, the ox crosses the distance between them, stops well out of reach. It places Domapem's palms together and executes a bow at the precise angle appropriate for a greeting from a layperson to a monk, for all that it does not drop its gaze from heirs. The ox studies Nere for a long moment before it speaks, its voice barely rising above the hum of life around them. Its face contorts abruptly into what takes Nere a few beats to realize is meant to be a smile, and her heart stutters. "What did you say?" A croaks as it turns and melts into the flow of pedestrian traffic. "Yeah, what did you just say to me?" But the ox has disappeared into the crowd. Later, Nere will try to convince himself that Air misheard the ox, that her mind filled in the gap in her understanding with something as familiar as its face, because what the AI said to Nere does not make sense. "The divine in me greets the divine in you."
Once again, that was Sounding the Fall by J.D. Marcade. This was originally episode 499, and now it's episode 899 as well. Yes, that means next week will be episode 900. All of our 99th episodes are excellent, but I chose this one because machine learning, more than ever, is front and center in the lives and careers of many people. We're far from producing what one might reasonably term artificial intelligence, but stories like this one explore the many ways such intelligence could manifest, how it could diverge from human experience, and how it might reproduce elements of humanity in its own fashion. In this case, a search for the divine in all of us, and beyond. We also see a darker side of tech that resonates with current experiences, how AI can literally or figuratively turn humans into drones, stripping us of our autonomy with or without our consent. As with any stories about the future, we must ask ourselves, is this what we want to become? And if not, what are we doing in the present to prevent it? Escape Pod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Don't change it, don't sell it. Please do share it. If you'd like to support Escape Pod, please rate or review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite app. We are 100% audience supported, and we count on your donations to keep the lights on and the servers humming. You can now donate via 4 different platforms. On Patreon and Ko-fi, search for Escape Artists. On Twitch, we're at EA Podcasts. You can also use PayPal through our website, escapepod.org. Patreon subscribers have access to exclusive merchandise and can be automatically added to our Discord, where they can chat with other fans, as well as our staff members. Our opening and closing music is by Daikaiju at daikaiju.org. And our closing quotation this week is from Yoon-Ha Lee, who said, "The problem with authority is that if you leave it lying around, others will take it away from you." Thanks for joining us, and may your escape pod be fully stocked with stories.